go. Let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys our agenda. It's also in the folder for anybody that's just coming in, and feel free to answer each other's questions in the chat box. I shared a link in the chat a little bit ago. I can reshare it if need be. I'll reshare it right now really quick for our slides for today. And I just want to quickly touch on our agenda just so that you kind of know the plan of what we're going to go through, and you can anticipate where the direction we're going to take. I want us, we're going to come back to this question, but I want us to think first about how can we make the most of a second dose of literacy. So when kids are having additional literacy instruction, what are ways, and honestly, some of this might be what you already know. We're going to look at some research inside of this. I know all of you were shared on the agenda. That's how you got to the Zoom link. So you'll even see on there some of the ways that we'll unpack this. I'm not just going to rehash what we already know is important, but I'm going to help us think strategically about how, if we are meeting with kids and giving them additional instruction, albeit during their class time, but then specifically during intervention time, what can we do during that time to make the most of those minutes? What does research say will help move them forward? I'm really excited for this second part of our conversation. Many of you have sat in on conversations with me and with Michelle and with each other around small group instruction. We've talked at length about small group instruction. I feel like that's like the buzzword in education the past few years. But one of the things that best helped me in my small group instruction, and I think this team specifically is ready for, was something I hashed out with a former colleague and mentor of mine, Kathleen Tolan, where we started to think about scheduling cycles of small group instruction. And I know that seems overwhelming when I share it. You're like, whoa, 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 I don't have time to start doing something new, but I'm going to show you just some simple ways that we can think about a gradual release of responsibility, that we can think about teaching kids the same skill in different ways across days so that we're really getting the most bang for our buck. We're going to from there look, and we'll even plan a cycle together. We're going to look closely at data. And this, again, I'll briefly touch on what you already know, but then we'll think about how that data can help us plan those cycles. And then I'm hoping to give you time. And here's where I might even need your help a little bit in putting together small groups or putting together breakouts that make sense for you. That's why I put grade levels, so that if we have time for us, and I know we will have time to do some planning, you're with people that it feels like that will be most efficient in your timing. And then last but not least, I guess two things. We're going to think about connections across classrooms, and this means connections across classrooms, whether it be the gen ed classroom and your intervention time, or connections across classrooms, meaning digital and in person. And so we'll end with some of that. Like I said before, although I'm here to present to you all and you're like, it's our first day back, don't put me on the spot, Megan. I am going to ask that you chime in and share your expertise as well as I share mine. You can talk amongst yourselves in the chat box. It looks like you're already solving each other's problems for renaming yourself so that I know who you are. You can help each other figure out how to rename. Looks like Lindsay's already helping us. And I think that's that. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, that was my big ramble to get us started. Let's go back to the previous question. I want us to just take a second and get our fingers going in that chat box. And I want us to think about that just briefly. Oops, I got ahead of myself. These two questions. What do you, and there's no right or wrong answer. We're just going to kind of, you'll see your colleagues type in and then we'll look for patterns. What do you feel is most important in reading instruction and reading intervention specifically? So when we think about a second dose, what do you feel is most important? And then if you think about having extra teaching minutes with kids, extra time with kids, what do you feel should be prioritized? And let's go ahead and just take a minute or two and have some conversations with each other in the chat box about those two questions. Could be a one-word answer. It could be multiple words, judgment-free zone. Somebody be the first to rip off the Band-Aid. Beautiful. Go for it. And you might even look as people are sharing at their positions and how that alters maybe what they share. So if somebody's K2, how might that be different than somebody that's 6'8"? I'll read some of them off. We've got individualization, responsive. I love it. Model, practice, feedback, engagement, Brian. So true, right? Like if we have extra minutes, but they're not with us, forget it. And I love it. Jeannie, adding on to that, the relationship, I think that's huge. And sometimes we forget about that. We're like, we've got intervention minutes. So I need to teach every minute during that intervention minute. And we forget that like, it's okay during an intervention minute or during intervention minutes to build community, to let kids talk to each other, to get kids buy-in so that they're engaged. Brooke, depending on the needs, yes. It's really hard when there's a big discrepancy. Yes, Michelle, depends on the needs, decoding, fluency, individualized instruction, responsiveness. I love it. Skills specific, targeted instruction. Connecting, yes. Oh my gosh, spot on. Connecting with the classroom. You guys can just take over. Is that what everybody wants to just chime in with their thing? No, I'm kidding. But like, yes, spot on. Fostering love for reading, engagement. Perfect. Similar needs, echo, lingo, yes, in terms of the classroom, modeling, practice, consistency, organization, spot on, you guys, no surprise. Yet, and I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, I think we look at this list and we can all admit, there's no guilt in this admission, myself included, that sometimes we get away from these things. Sometimes we get so focused on delivering an intervention program or getting through a guided reading book or getting kids to do the assignment that we forget about some of these things. Sometimes we focus so much on the classroom instruction and mastering what we're teaching in the classroom that we forget to individualize student needs. Quite frankly, sometimes we're just overwhelmed and we don't have time to look at what each student needs. And so our instruction doesn't necessarily always match these things. All of these things you listed, I think we all agree wholeheartedly with, but they're easier said than done. And so I want us during the next 3 hours, 2 hours and whatever it is, ish, and we'll take a break in that. 3 hours just sounded daunting. You all are like, oh gosh, need more coffee. But during our chunk of time together this morning, I am hoping that we can take all of those things you just put and try to think about how we can prioritize those when we are teaching kids during our intervention minutes. Again, adding to all the great things that you're already doing. So the next thing I want us to do to get started, and this is actually something you can do with kids in different ways, but we're going to start with what I call a write around. If we were in a live classroom right now, you would do this with pieces of chart paper, and you could do all sorts of things in the middle. I've done this with kids where you do pictures or you do quotes from a book or you do symbols and they write around it. But we are going to do this activity today. This activity, again, that's an overstatement. We're going to get our minds thinking on a Jamboard. So right now in the chat box, I'm going to share a Jamboard that you guys have editing access to. And on this Jamboard, what you're going to find, let me just get to it myself. On this Jamboard, there are going to be a series of slides, jams, if you will. And on these series of slides, you are going to see different quotes, different images, different graphics. And what I'm going to ask us to do, you don't have to respond to every one. You don't have to start with the first and then go beyond. But I'm going to ask you to we're going to take about 5 minutes and spend some time with some of these slides. You could click through first and pick your favorite. You could just start with the first one, and we're going to do a write around. And so what that means is after you read a quote or look at an image or a graph, and I'll put this in the chat box right now, you're going to share a thought or response. And after you share a thought or reaction to that quote, you can talk back to each other. Now, when you share the response, you can do it with a Post-it. So maybe I read this one and I want to write my little response there. And then I put save and it pops up right there. So I could share it in that way. And if I want to talk back to that person, I could also do it with the text and talk back around that Post-it of what somebody said. Feel free to adjust the size if need be. Honestly, I'm just doing this as a way for, too many are viewing. Let's make copies. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you guys. Just 1 second. Stick with me. I'm going to put a couple copies in here. This hasn't happened to me before, but I also don't know that I've tried Jamboard with 68 people. So hang on 1 second. If you are on, you can get started. If not, give me 30 seconds. I'm gonna stop share. Hang on 1 second. Thanks for your patience, guys. I'm gonna make a copy. Okay. Thanks for being patient. Okay. So now in the chat is another Zoom. Some of you, or another link. Some of you can try that one. I'm gonna do another one. It really doesn't matter where I'm just making copies. Okay, perfect. I know there's still probably not enough. Copy of copy. Thanks for your patience, guys. This is where kids would be interrupting us. I can't do it. I can't work it. We're good. Okay, share. Okay, there's another one in here. There's another one. If you need it, and I'll do one more. Make a copy, and then I think we should have enough. Okay. You can read any of the 9 slides, take a look, take some time now. We'll have a chance to chat about them shortly. Put the last one in there. I think hopefully everybody's on now. Let me know if not. Oh yeah, it looks like you can get about 30 on one, just so that you know, with your class. Who knew? But we're good. If for some reason you stepped away, just reminding us all, and then I'll stop talking. We're looking at the Jamboard links that are in the chat box. And when you look at it, the steps could be to read a quote or look at an image. I'm also going to put these in the chat, and then we're doing a write around. So a write around might be just adding your comments or your thoughts and even talking back to each other. Beautiful. I'll share an example. If you're unsure, this is what we're doing. Feel free, you don't have to start. I didn't put them in any particular order. If for some reason you're just hopping on just to share what we're doing, just in case you need it, we are doing a quick write around, looking at some research, some quotes, some graphics. So if you follow that link, I see some of you are on there. The idea is that you do some reading of the different quotes. You read back to each other. You put some thinking, some thoughts. Okay. I'm going to give it like one more minute. These aren't going anywhere. I'll put them all in the folder so that you have access to them. Especially I'm thinking like reading specialists or those of you who work with other teams of people who aren't here. These are all some great quotes and graphs to go back to. Depending on the age appropriateness, like middle school teachers, I've even shared like those reading minutes. I've shared that graph with kids before. So some of these quotes or these graphs could even be things that you bring into your instruction. And then what we're going to do right now, I'm going to open up initial breakout rooms. And now we started some quiet conversation. By the way, I'm modeling what we can do for kids, sometimes giving them some think time to read and to write, even if it's kinder and they're looking at images. If you do one of these write arounds and you're doing something like this, get them doing that first, and then you can open up the spoken conversation and you'll see that the conversation goes up as a result of kids' time to engage with some of what you share first. So I'm going to open up some initial breakout rooms. They're going to be at random first, doesn't matter who you're with. And I put some prompts in the chat box if you need them. But the idea is we're just going to take 3 minutes. We'll come back, let's say 8:41, we're going to come back. I'll pull you all back. Let's give it 8:42. But let's just have some conversations. What are we thinking? What do these quotes remind you? What challenges you? What are the yes buts? What are the yes ands? Which ones did you like? Which ones did you look at? Go ahead and say good morning to each other and we'll go from there. Off you go.
Okay.
Did we break the rules? Shoot.
Are we the only ones here?
Well, it says 8:43. I don't know.
Well, we'll wait. I'll take us an orange break. So nothing else exciting there, Kendall, besides our room is a furnace?
No, and honestly, I'm kind of like being on a nerdy mission today to try to like maximize my time. So I
That's
kind of
awesome.
came in and started just doing
Yeah.
that. It's just been on my. So
No, totally.
kind of like said my friendly, like if I wasn't passing with people, but I didn't really like go around it. But I think everyone's kind of like that because it's just overwhelming with the start of everything. One thing I thought about is I probably could use speakers because I have quite a few that are still going to be remote.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard when you're like trying to stay distant, interact with the kids at the table, have them here. So I've previously had them like logging in so that the one at home or two at home don't feel left out. But I'm like, sometimes it would just be nice to like turn the screen and.
I wonder if Mary has some.
I know. I mean, there's got to be. I don't even care if they're from the 80s.
Yeah.
More than
There's got to be just some random speakers somewhere,
Plug them attach it to the tape player that we have.
or where do we fall in the pecking order of the wireless headphones? I kind of want to. Do you know, Lisa? Have you heard at your building? Like, do you have any?
we've not gotten them.
Okay. I mean,
No, we don't
I
have
get why we were like put to, I get it. But
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? Now that the students are shuffling around, some are staying home temporarily or not, it would be nice to have those.
Right.
Muted. So all good things. I mean, I was hearing, a lot of times we can look at this research and we can say, yes, but yes, but I'm being asked to do this. Yes, but this doesn't match what FMP is telling me. Yes, but here are some things. I'm also hoping we can look at some of those quotes to help us get back to some of what is important. And I'm just going to take a second for us to look at some of them together. And then I'm going to ask you guys, feel free, please, and talk amongst yourselves. This is the perk of Zoom PD. Please feel free in the chat box if you want to continue the conversation with one another about what you were talking about in your groups, you can go for it. As I put together those quotes and those resources, and honestly, a lot of it came from conversations that I had with Michelle and some of all of you as we were planning our time together. I wanted to point out just a couple. Oops, sorry, I have the wrong thing shared. I wanted to just point out a couple. I lost my slides. Give me a second. Okay. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, I wanted to just point out a couple that I think will help us drive towards what we think is, or what we know to be important. If we look at this question, what feels most important, what should be prioritized? And there's a handful that I want us to look at. The first one that I want us to look at is just thinking about this chart. And again, depending on the grade level you teach, I think this is a really powerful chart. You can even look at, share with kids. It's a great one to share with parents. It comes from Kylene Beers and David Probst's Disrupting Thinking. And by the way, all the articles that I pulled from, all the materials are in our folder that I shared under research. There's a whole folder that has all of these things in there. But if you look at this, it just leads us to be reminded that the minutes students spend reading matter. And one of the things that can happen when kids get intervention and they get additional time is that we feel so stressed about the instruction that they're missing, the instruction that they don't have, that we spend that time instructing instead of trying to also prioritize practice. And so actually Richard Allington does a lot of talk about this, that he talks about how there's in schools across the globe in his research, a lot of times students that have the biggest reading deficit are getting maybe 10, 15 minutes of reading a day versus our stronger readers are maybe getting 60 to 75 minutes of reading a day. It's in the article, what research or what really matters for struggling readers, that's in that folder. But I just think it's a reminder that when kids come to us in intervention blocks, it's okay to give them more time to read during that time. It's okay to say, how are we going to increase the minutes, even if it's 10 extra minutes that they have to read? Because what this graph shows us is that minutes spent reading matter. Minutes spent reading matter when it comes to state testing and that percentile rank. Minutes spent reading matter when it comes to exposure to language. I think of our ELs and our students who need language support. The more minutes they spend reading, the more minutes they get with eyes on print, and the more they'll grow. I have two nephews, Tommy and Freddie, who are very privileged boys and do not have special needs for reading. But I do notice that Tommy spends a ridiculous amount of minutes reading, and he is far beyond where Freddie is at, his twin brother, who spends no minutes reading and lots of minutes on the hockey ice. And Tommy's reading maybe at a 6th grade level. He never puts a book down, versus Freddie is barely reading at his own 2nd grade level. Again, I'm just using that as a really applicable example of how minutes spent reading matter. The second thing that I want us to just look at is this quote that Wiggins gives us. And I think this is a really good reminder in some of what you all put. He talks about how having learners recast what they've learned in their own terms is significant for long-term memory. And I share this with you all because all of you are working with struggling readers. All of you are working with readers who we are trying to help bridge the gap and help grow. And one of the biggest things holding them back, according to Grant Wiggins' research, is that they are not transferring skills that they are learning from day to day, or transferring skills that they're learning from one classroom to the next. So when you're bringing kids together, I did this actually in one of the videos that some of the elementary teachers saw it at the beginning of December, gosh, way back when. And I pulled some kids together. They were in 2nd grade. The teacher said they were having trouble with their vowel blends. And I pulled them together and I just put the word vowels on a piece of paper. And we took 1 minute and I said to these struggling readers, these striving readers, what are all the things you know about this word vowel? I was blown away. I wish I still had the image. I can share the video with you. It was probably already shared with you. But they were saying all sorts of things, giving me all sorts of rules, giving me all sorts of vowel patterns. And it was an opportunity, even in that intervention group, in 1 minute, to help learners recast what they had learned in their own terms. So maybe in your intervention groups, try to set aside the first minute to ask students a question like that. What do you already know about main idea? What did you learn in the classroom already? What do readers do when they read fluently? If they tell you the wrong answer, that's okay. It's just an opportunity for you to assess and them to practice transferring. The third thing that I wanted to point out is this one by Allington, and some of you might have looked at this, but I think that this is such a reminder for us, and I am saying this despite the fact that the district has given you materials, that many of us have intervention programs that we use as EL teachers, as resource teachers, as reading interventionists. But what Allington says here is those programs aside, in order to get kids to grow and in order to bridge that gap, special materials aren't always required. Instead, it's thinking about how do we get kids to comprehend? How do we motivate them? How do we get them to just read and to write and to talk and to help kids actually have conversations around their skills instead of spending all of our time delivering skills? I won't tell you who because I'm kind of throwing her under the bus right now, but in another school that I work in, I have this beautiful intervention teacher who is wonderful at LLI, like off the charts in her ability to deliver LLI lessons. However, when she was saying to me, Megan, it doesn't seem to be working, I observed her a couple times. And one of the things we talked about was students aren't getting a time to practice. You're beautiful at delivering this lesson every day, but the student talk is so much lower than the teacher talk. The student practice is so much lower than the teacher delivery. So think about that with the minutes spent. And then last but not least, I guess I put two more on here, is just thinking about the list, and this comes from Richard Allington's book, What Really Matters in Response to Intervention. Some of you probably have it on your shelves. And he just talks about some obvious things that I think you guys already named. I share this because I think it reiterates what you were saying in the chat box earlier. But I think at the end of the day, program aside, if we can think to ourselves, when we are working with kids, when we have extra time, how do we give them more time to read? How do we give them more time to transfer? How do we give them more time to talk? And I almost feel like that should be like a chart in our room, our own mantra. I need to increase time you have to read, increase time you have to transfer, increase time you have to talk. And yes, programs can help me do all three of those things. But at the end of the day, for any struggling reader, for any reader that's striving to move towards grade level, giving them more time to read, giving them more time to transfer, giving them more time to talk will move them forward. And so I share that. Again, I'm sharing what you guys already know. That's why I said it was a soft start, right? But I think it's also a good reminder, especially midway through the year, when we can get so loaded down on all of these things that we have to deliver and all of these programs that we've given. And Anne-Marie, you were talking earlier, all these assessments that we have to give. And I'm taking this assessment. Now it needs to drive this instruction. Yes, yes, yes. And we'll go there. But at the end of the day, reading, transferring, and talk will move kids forward. Okay. And I think those, I need to remind myself of that all the time. I think we all do when we get bogged down in curriculum, when we get bogged down in resources, when we get bogged down in what we need to do. So with that said, that was kind of my big start for us. We are going to move into the so what, into the practical. So if we want to maximize, we're going to keep going back to those three things today: time to read, time to transfer, time to talk. How can we teach small group instruction? And I'm saying small group again, that's such a buzzword. I'm not talking, it could be in the regular classroom, but I'm thinking specifically when they're getting this second dose of literacy. How can we plan small groups that maximize these things? And I went ahead and put a chart in our, a chart that I like. It's cutesy for our middle school teachers, but it's for teachers, not for kids, but teachers need cutesy sometimes too. But it's a chart that I like to use just as a reminder. I think it does a really nice job of pointing out what to prioritize when it comes to small group instruction. And sorry, there we go. When we think about what to prioritize when it comes to small group instruction, I think always starting with, okay, what are we going to teach and how are we going to teach it? And we'll go to this in just a second. Remembering to keep our small group instruction short. And I think you guys all know this. I don't mean that, we might have 30 minutes of students to be with us in an intervention block. It doesn't say keep the practice short, it keeps the teaching short. So we want to think about practice as being the end goal. Student practice, student approximation. So practice is also approximation, where kids are trying things and practicing and moving that into mastery. So less teacher and more student. I've said that before. I think we all know it to be true, but easier said than done. We all probably are talkers. I'm just saying it. Like, I won't make you raise your hands. I won't make you tell me, but like, I imagine that all of us, whether it's you, Claudia, you, Brian, you, Ariana, you, Marie, whatever it is, we probably all need to decrease our teacher talk and increase student practice. I think remembering to guide students through work and to remind ourselves that there's different ways to guide. In a second, we're going to talk about inquiry, that it's trying to get them to do the heavy lifting. And it's also thinking about the student ownership that we're handing over. Because at the end of the day, if I own the learning and the students don't own the learning, there's not going to be the follow through. Few other things, I think using this word coach, I like this chart because this word coach, I like to use to remind us that the teacher equals the coach. And the basketball coach wouldn't go out on the court and play the game for the players. The players play the game. And the coach can't only talk to Kate while Kate's playing the game. The coach needs to give lean prompts. The coach needs to give little tips as kids work to move them forward. I've probably shared with you 1,000 times that when I'm out for a run and I picture my cross-country coach from high school, Coach Brown, standing in front of me, he's no longer even living, but if I'm running and I picture him, I'm like, oh boy, better get working, better get practicing, better pick up those knees. So think about that as your role. You're kind of the Coach Brown that gets them running up the hill and not walking up the hill during those minutes. That's one of the best uses of your minutes. Because in other minutes, when kids are independently practicing, they probably don't have a coach next to them. So when you're in an intervention time, that's your time to be the coach, to get them to run up the hill and not walk up the hill. Okay. 3 more things. I think being very invitational for students to try work on their own. So between intervention groups, and again, you guys probably already do these things, but it's just a reminder. How are you saying to kids, not, okay, I'll see you on Thursday, but instead, and which I've said that before. I've said, okay, I'll see you on Thursday, but I try to pull back and say, okay, so between now and Thursday, here is where you'll practice this. Between now and Thursday, here's what I expect for follow through. And I think that is the link for closure. A lot of times I think about link to independence at the end of your time. So when kids are in brick and mortar school, when they're in in-person school, one of the things that's worked for intervention blocks, especially if kids are coming to a different place, whether it be a small group in the classroom or whether it be to another classroom where they're coming to interventions, have them bring all of their materials, even if you're not going to use them. So have them bring their book baggie, have them bring their whole class read aloud if they're in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade or younger. Have them bring all of the materials that they would use for reading in the classroom, so that if nothing else, during the last 2 minutes, you can say, okay, pick up that book, pick up that red kayak book, and say to yourself, how are you going to practice this in the red kayak book? They don't have to do it right in front of you, but to even show them the physical materials helps. And then this is what we're going to move into next with cycles, thinking about how you'll follow through, so that it's not one and done. I think all, I keep using the word guilty, and that doesn't feel like the right word, but I do think that a lot of times our intervention groups to kids feel like one-hit wonders. And now that gets changed if we do like a guided reading book across days, but sometimes it feels like they come and they go and they come back the next day and it's something totally different. Even if we're like, it's not different, it's all the same. But being very transparent for kids about the follow through and the plan can be really, really, really helpful. Even in the classroom. So one thing that's worked, this could be in your intervention room or in the classroom that kids are at, to even have like a calendar on your board. And it doesn't need to be fancy. It could be Megan Chicken Scratch. But to have a calendar on your board that just reminds kids of when you'll meet with them again and what you'll do when you meet with them. So maybe I have a certain color of Post-it that I put, and the blue group knows that this is their Post-it, and they just see that there's going to be follow through. It doesn't need to be fancy, but I think sometimes just being very transparent. I'm a big fan of like, take our teacher book, and it doesn't need to be a secret. I'm not saying show them all your notes and show them your planner, but be transparent with kids about what's the follow-up going to be, what's their next appointment, instead of what's their next intervention group, right? And I'm not saying you don't have to refer to it in that way, but if you think about the appointment for follow-up, it feels a little bit more real life than the next intervention group. Okay, that was a lot of Megan rambling. I want you to pause and think from these things that I just shared. What do we feel confirms, pats us on the back, like, got that, already know that. Probably already know all of these things, so I shouldn't say that. I should say, what pats us on the back of, that goes well for me? And what from this list are things that we might struggle with? Maybe not for our own reasons, but because of the group of kids we work with, or because of the grade level we work with, or the ELs that we work with. Which of these things, we're going to skip that first one for now. Which of these things go well? Which of these things cause some roadblocks? And I'm just going to give some quiet think time. This is always where it's really awkward on Zoom. We're not going to go to breakouts right now, but I am going to say that if you want to unmute and share to start the conversation across the group, go for it. You might even start by your pat on the back. What goes well for you, if that's the easiest way to share. Some of you have likely already had these conversations with each other. You can type it in the chat. Beautiful. Yes, Melinda. that link for closure. I struggle with this sometimes with time. You don't even realize what time it is. And you're like, oh my gosh, especially like middle school when there's time periods, you're like, the period's over. I forgot to tell you what to do about that. I forgot to link that to independent practice. I'm going to be quiet for a second, just let you guys kind of think, talk amongst yourselves, read the chat. If you want to unmute and share, go for it. I'm just going to add on a few things as I was hearing you chat during that. I'll chime in with you. I think I made it about a minute of awkward silence. I usually don't do well with that. But just hearing a few things you're saying, and this is going to lead right into our next bit on trying to think about a sequence of small groups. Two things. I think at the very beginning, many of you are sharing what I think is so predictable. How do we get kids to follow through and practice independently? I think that is so hard. That's hard at a young level. That's hard at a higher level. And a lot of times when we think about why, there's a few things. It could be learned helplessness. It could be that students are constantly dependent on an adult. In fact, a lot of times that's the issue, is that those students that need the extra practice and support are so used to teacher dependence and to adult dependence that the minute you tell them to be independent and they struggle, they don't know what to do besides come back to you. So teaching kids how to go to interdependence, to use tools, to use charts, to use materials, to use resources will help them so that they don't have to be dependent. I also wonder, and this is what's going to help us with this series, if kids really aren't doing something independently and they're struggling, I often ask, am I over scaffolding or am I over teaching? If I'm over scaffolding, sometimes you can't do it on your own. If something is so scaffolded, it's like doing a pull-up with the weights underneath you that are like 3 times your body weight. Well, of course it's going to be easy. It just pushes me right up. But then I can't do a pull-up on my own. And I'm not saying that's what we're going to move to next. It can't be all or nothing, but thinking about gradual release can help us with that. I also think we have to give ourselves permission to know that if we are working with striving readers, there is a reason why they are not yet doing whatever it is that they might be doing in the gen ed classroom. And it's not our responsibility in one day to get them from here to here. It's not our responsibility to get them to master this classroom teaching if they're reading 4 levels below grade level or even more in one day. That's not possible. Instead, it's how do I move them towards that? I think sometimes we focus so much on getting them to master this grade level that we forget all the steps in between. I'm also wondering, one more thing that you guys said that I just wanted to talk back to. I love that you're picking up on the coaching. Yeah, timing, group talk, group discussion, student ownership. Oh, I know the last thing I was going to say. I think this is so hard. A lot of times kids won't keep working because I'm working with one student. And so the minute I start working with one student, it's like, nobody's doing anything. We're all like rolling around on the floor, or we're going like, who knows, we disappeared from the Zoom screen. That's why I try to really think about lean coaching, and think about an analogy I like to use. That I've used for years. And I actually heard Jen Saravallo share this recently, and I was like, oh, great minds. I'm not comparing myself to Jen Saravallo, but I do think this is a good analogy that you've maybe heard in different ways, is thinking about our instruction being more like a sprinkler instead of a hose. And when you water a plant with a hose, it gets watered really fast and it starts to bubble over really fast. It gets like too much water really quickly. Versus if you're a sprinkler, it's a little bit more. And so when you're working in intervention groups and you're working in groups with 3, 4, 5, 6 students, think about being that sprinkler. It's helped me tremendously to have the sprinkler approach instead of the hose approach. And I even say to myself, Megan, you're being a hose right now, move on. Even if it's, I'll come back to you, and just like walk away from the child, and then doing like gestures of keep going, got this, keep going. Like you're kind of looking behind your back, but that lean coaching is really helpful. If we are on Zoom, if we are doing digital remote teaching for kids in hybrid or whatever it is, this is where opening individual breakout rooms, even during an intervention group, can be really helpful. I know many of you have already played with that, but you've got to be really careful. I've been teaching writing and reading workshop on Tuesday nights on Zoom online. And I have to check myself that when I go into a Zoom room, I look at the clock and I'm like, gotta move. Can't get sucked into Anne-Marie's room for 5 minutes. I need to move on to Gretchen's room, or I need to move on to Colleen's room. And so I, even in Zoom, try to think really quickly bouncing between, even if it's just popping in and saying, keep going, Sue. Where'd you go, Melissa? I'll be right back. Or bouncing in and saying, oh, Margarita, you must be getting a drink. I'll be back to your room in 30 seconds. So those types of lean prompts, even the keep going, the look up, show me your book. What page are you on? Read a line, Michelle. Read a line, Heather. That type of lean coaching inside of our Zoom or our digital teaching can be equally as important as it is in person. And we can talk about that more here in a little bit, okay? Now, I love that you guys are talking amongst yourselves. Yes, yes, yes. Michelle, we're going to go there in a little bit. Like even the takeaway from that small group. Let's put that on pause for a second. Okay, I'm going to bring all these pieces together. So we've got, I think we all agree that we want some more of these things, and we probably all have our Achilles heel of which of these things we need to get more of. Clearly mine is over talking. But the first thing that on this chart that we saw that I kind of skipped is to choose what and how to teach. So the next part that we're going to do, and then we'll take a little break and then we'll move into doing a deeper dive, is I want us to think about, in order to get kids to learn a skill with independence and practice independently. And that struggle is real. That's why we're here. And you're like, I need some strategies, because just doing what we're doing doesn't always move them forward in the way that we need. I start by thinking about methods of instruction. And not necessarily modalities of instruction, like using music or using visuals, but I think the teaching, like how am I teaching something? What are my methods of instruction? And there are typically 4 main methods of instruction. And I'm going to ask us, just for fun sake, for engagement sake, I'm going to, in a moment, send us to breakout rooms really quickly. And I'm going to have us practice being teachers. Well, I bounce around and leanly, don't worry, it's not all that high stakes. Well, I bounce around and leanly try to identify the different types of instruction, methods of instruction that we're seeing. And I'll bring it back together when we come back. You might even just be paying attention to how each other are teaching and how that's the same or different than how you would teach, okay? The end goal of these breakouts is to identify different methods of instruction, which could also be considered, what is the gradual release of responsibility? What are the different levels of scaffolding? But let's just focus on methods. That probably sounded more fancy than it's going to be. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put directions in the prompt. You are going to teach group members in your breakout room how to draw a flower. Members how to draw a flower. And the person who's going to teach first in the group, happy birthday. It's the person whose birthday comes next. And you are going to be the teacher first. It doesn't have to be long. And you're going to try and teach everybody in your group. Try to not talk about it. Try to not come up with the methods. Just do it. Just be a teacher and teach the people how to draw a flower, okay? As best you can. After you teach them how to draw a flower, if there's still time, the person whose birthday comes next can go and try it in their way, okay? Whatever that means to you, try to not overthink it, try to not process it. Person whose birthday comes next, teach your breakout room how to draw a flower. The person whose birthday comes after that, you go second. We're only gonna get like 4 or 5 minutes, so we will come back together when I bounce around leanly and see that we're ready to come back, okay? That's it. Teach each other how to draw a flower, and then we'll come back together. I put directions in the breakout or in the chat so that you have them. Okay, sorry, those of you whose birthday is next. Do you hate me? I should have said the person whose birthday was last. I don't know. Alexis is like, yes. No, I'm kidding. Keep us on our toes a little bit. I could have had you teach each other how to draw a car. That's the harder one. I thought about that. Then people really don't like me. That's a tricky one. Okay, we'll give it 1 second just as people are popping back. I think we've got everybody. Okay. So saw lots of great things. And when we think about methods of instruction, I'm gonna name those out in a second. I saw a variety. I tried to pop between all of the rooms and see different things. And here's some of what I saw. I saw that Melinda was doing some awesome guided practice. Everybody draw a circle. Okay, everybody draw the circles around. I left pretty soon, but draw a squiggly line. You use that word, Melinda. And Melinda wasn't necessarily showing, she was just kind of explaining the steps. She said if she was in her classroom, she would, but it doesn't matter. Like, it's just a different method, and I'll explain that in a second. Danielle was doing something very similar. Let's all do this together. Then let's all do this. Then let's all do this. Kevin, I like that you named out, here are the steps. And then you pose the inquiry question. What are we drawing? What is this? What does this make? Sarah, you were doing some demonstration inside of your teaching. Nick, you didn't know this, but you could have been dipping into some inquiry when you were saying, what are these things called again? I think you were really asking the question, but that would have been a great support for kids to even think about what those things are. So let's just unveil, and these things, some of you are actually, it's on the agenda and it's on the slide deck that some of you are on right now. But if we think about the methods of instruction, really there's 4 main methods. And of course there's different things we can use. And some of us use a hybrid of these things. It doesn't have to be all one or the other, but there's guided practice, there's demonstration, there's explanation and example, and there's inquiry. And I know you're like, Megan, we need practical, but stick with me for a second, because I think once we understand the difference, and we know the difference, but we understand the purpose and the difference between these, it's going to help us get more increase in student independence across days when we're thinking about days of a small group or a cycle of small group instruction. I'm going to break down each of these with just a few more things to share, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves in the chat box as I share them. So when we think about the first, I'm going to start with what I would say is the most heavily scaffolded method of instruction. This is also probably those of us who work with students who are striving readers, who might need some extra support. This is probably what we're best at. Quite frankly, this is probably what teachers do the most of. And it's a very powerful method of instruction, but it's only one method of instruction. And often, to some of you who are saying that you don't get students to practice things on their own very much, when we reflect on our teaching, often, all of us, myself included, it's because we probably did too much guided practice, too much heavy lifting. Now, that said, guided practice is really powerful. If I think about some of the tenets or the reasons why guided practice is awesome for new teaching. Guided practice is great for when something is difficult or students are struggling with something. So in the classroom, if they're not understanding main idea at all, and I need to do some guided practice first, that's going to help them. The new teaching, this is why guided reading teaches kids the skills of their instructional level of text. It's because you're guiding them in how to read that book. You're literally guiding them step by step. Even when I popped in most of your rooms, all of you had some sort of guided practice in your teaching. It was like, little step, now you do it. Little step, now you do it. Little step, now you do it. And if you think about that, when students aren't with us and they don't have somebody to say, little step, now you do it. Little step, now you do it. Little step, now you do it, then they struggle, right? It's like a student who can tie their shoe, or a kid who can tie their shoe if they're sitting right next to you and you tell them the steps, but they can't do it on their own. It's important, but it's not the only method. Guided practice also usually has some heavy scaffolding. Guided practice goes best when it's followed up, even in a subsequent session, by something else. So if all I use is guided practice, I'm constantly just tying the shoe for them. I'm constantly doing that little step. The next layer of method of instruction in terms of scaffolding would be demonstration. And when we think about demonstration, this is what most often is taught in a mini lesson or a strategy or a structure for a mini lesson. It's where there is some modeling and some practice. It usually names steps. So instead of little bit, now you do it, little bit, and now you do it, I say, here are the 3 steps, watch me as I. It's really important that in demonstration, we think about, so this could be naming my steps 1, 2, or 3. It's also helpful in demonstration if I'm remembering to ask kids to think along with me, and not just asking kids to think along, but also thinking aloud. So if I'm practicing, and we're going to do this in a little bit, but if I'm modeling for students how to read fluently and work on their phrasing, and I'm demonstrating, I might say, so I'm going to show you how this might go. But as I'm doing it, I'm saying, okay, wait, let me go back and read that. Wait, where should I scoop? Oh, think along with me. How would you say that, Allie? Oh, Alexis, I can tell you're thinking. So even in a demonstration, I actually think demonstration goes south, and we've probably all seen it either watching colleagues or people we've watched teach before me. Maybe you've seen it with me, where demonstration goes south because their kids are totally checked out while the teacher is modeling. It's really important that the kids are checked in when the teacher is modeling and not checked out. 2 more methods just to name out, and I know, again, I'll break it down for us why these things are even important for us to think about in a second. Explanation and example, and sorry, I ruined my spacing here of my little Post-its, but this is where you need to assume some background. So if you didn't even know what a flower was and you said to somebody, or a circle was, if I said to somebody, draw a circle, and they're like, wait, what? What's a circle? I don't know what a circle is. I can't do explanation and example. Explanation and example would say, okay, we're going to draw a flower. And when we draw a flower, we draw a little circle in the middle, some ovals on the outside, and our stem that goes down. It's when you refer to something that kids already know. So it assumes some background. It usually includes many steps. Oftentimes I call explanation and example big teaching. Something that's gonna it's a lot packed into a little bit of time. And that's why it assumes some background knowledge. Explanation and example is also familiar. It's when it's familiar. It's when something is a reminder. And there's times I can do that. If I'm working with a 5th grader who's working on their fluency, I can say to them, I need you to scoop those words to the punctuation. Versus I can't say that to a 1st grader who's never heard that before or doesn't know what punctuation is. It assumes some background knowledge. And then last but not least, this is actually a really powerful method. It's one that I don't think we use often enough. And when we do use it, again, myself included, I think we could always work on being more deliberate in it. And that's inquiry. This is where it's self-guided. This is where we get a lot of ownership. But this is also where we usually base it on something. We base it on a model, or we base it on a mentor. I don't just say, so how do you think you elaborate in your writing? Instead, I might say, let's ask this question. How does this writer elaborate on their writing? And then we look at it. Or if I'm looking at a smaller example for reading, I might say, let's listen. And we were talking about this earlier, Brian, in your group, but I might say, we're going to listen to Brian read. And let's think, what is Brian doing in his reading that makes his reading sound good to us as the listeners? So I pose, that wasn't the best question, sorry, but stick with me, right? I pose a question and then we listen to Brian with that thought in mind. I actually think one group was talking about kids reading aloud when we were looking at the research. And I actually think inquiry is a great place for kids to hear each other reading, especially when it comes to Zoom teaching right now. Some of us that are primary teachers are probably used to partner reading, where kids hear each other read and they can do a little inquiry where they're listening to each other read and they can hear what phrasing and expression and fluency sounds like. Even word solving, they can notice how partners are decoding. But I think doing that maybe by listening to a video of each other read or sending kids to breakout rooms together could also be equally as powerful. I share these things with you. And again, we'll take a break in just a second and come back to the practical, because I think it's just a good reminder. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but if you are only doing guided practice and you're never getting to explanation and example, or you're never ending with some inquiry, you're probably not going to get the independence that you're looking for. I'm going to share one more slide for you guys. I'm trying to go back and forth between slides and what we're looking at. And on this slide, I keep losing where my slides are at. Please tell me I'm not the only person this happens to. Hang on. Where did that go? Just trying to be savvy. Thanks for being patient. I can't see it, but you guys can. When we go to, hang on, sorry guys. I don't know what keeps happening. You guys are being really patient with me. Sorry, one sec. When we go, you're being super patient. Here we go. And so I don't know why I keep getting out of it. Here we go. This is Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey's work, where they look at thinking about the gradual release of responsibility model. And that's essentially the 4 methods that I just shared, that you might think about teacher responsibility moving into the student responsibility. So it's no different. When I share these 4 methods, it's no different than this. When we come back from, we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, I want us to think about, so what? So how do we plan? Okay, if we look at this, we look at the gradual release, we look at these methods of instruction, how can we plan a series of small groups that releases scaffolding over time. So what that's going to look like when we come back is if I have 4 days to work with students in a small group, and I have even some planners that we can look at, but if I have 4 days to work with students and you have more than 4 days, but if I plan in a cycle of 4 days or even 3 days, I might say to myself, well, on the first day, we're going to do some guided practice. The next day they come back to me, I'm going to try and be more demonstration based. And then the last day we're going to do an inquiry. There's no science. There is science to it, but you know what I mean? There's no right or wrong. But if I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to work with these students on their word endings or their vowel teams. That was a small group I referred to already today. This group is struggling with vowel teams and the long vowel sounds. So I'm going to think on day 1 how to do some guided practice. The next day they come back to me. I'm not going to teach something new. We're going to do the same thing, but I'm going to just model it with a little bit more demonstration. And then I'm going to do some explanation and example. I might layer in a little bit more teaching, but I'm not just thinking every single day it's going to be guided practice. I say to myself, even though I feel redundant, these 3 days are going to be focused on vowel teams. And that is going to build independence because across these 3 days, I'm going to release scaffolding. I'm going to be very teacher heavy. I do a little, you do a little, I do a little, you do a little, I do a little, you do a little on day 1. The next day, I might just say, watch me as I preview the page for my vowel teams and then go for it. And then here I just say, you know the drill, you know what to do. These are vowel teams. Have at it. Get reading, readers. And maybe on the last day, I show them some vowel teams that don't make the long vowel sound. And I say, what do we do about this? What do we do when we get to a word that looks a little different? And what a great inquiry question. So then across 4 days, I've helped a group of students master their ability to read words and look at vowel teams and blends, thinking about long vowel sounds, because it wasn't just 1 day of guided practice or 1 day of 5,000 things, but it was looking at my data and saying, this is the thing they're really struggling with. Let me try and get them to master this across days. Now, obviously, when I do that, they're also practicing other things, but my focus is helping me to be focused in my teaching so that their mastery and their output increases with student independence. Does that make sense to you guys? And I think I used to always jump into small groups and just say, okay, we're reading the same book for days, or we're going to work on main idea across days, and I'm going to do a different strategy. And I'm not saying that that's not the case. Some of us have done that Susanna, you're next to me in our little Zoom screen. So I'm picturing doing that in your classroom to say, here's main idea, and to say, here are different strategies. And across days, I might teach different strategies. But the kids we're talking about right now, the kids we're talking about today as we're in this session, are kids for some reason or not that are having a hard time bridging a gap or who are getting extra minutes. And in those extra minutes, layering them with 5,000 new strategies is not going to be as helpful as thinking about how can I increase their time to read, increase their time to transfer, and increase their time to talk, all while increasing their independence. And I can do that by varying my methods and being really deliberate over time. Being deliberate, but I also want to say this before we break, being flexible. I do not want you guys to leave today and be like, every day 1 has to be this, and every day 2 has to be this, and every day 3 has to be this. But having a plan will help you not make it all a hybrid or not make it all this. And I think a lot of times when we don't have a plan for our method, it just becomes a hodgepodge or it becomes all of this. And we're not thinking about how to release that scaffolding over time. So when we come back, I'm going to share some small group planners with you guys. We're going to even quickly plan one together. We're going to think about looking at data, and then I'm going to give you guys some time. We're going to have some time to actually think about one of our intervention groups that we work with in the coming weeks or the next semester, and think about some of their data, and then actually take some time to plan out what a sequence of small group work might look like. I think this is just a starting point. Over time, wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if we can start sharing with each other and to say, here's a sequence that worked really well for me. Here's how I layered my teaching in this. At the end of the day, though, plans aside, if you just keep these 4 things in mind, you're going to be a step in the right direction. You've got time to practice, time to transfer, time to talk, and you have these 4 things. kids are going to move forward. Okay. And you're going to increase their ability to learn the skills that you're teaching with independence. I'm being a broken record right now. So we are going to take a break. We'll come back. We're going to do a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 9:50. Does that sound good to everybody? Come back at 9:50, refill your coffee, whatever. And from there, we'll go into just modeling how you would plan a sequence of small groups. We're going to look at data. We'll talk about some roadblocks. We'll talk about classroom connections. If there's specific things that you want me to tackle, or questions you have, or things that you're like, no, I need more of this, less of this, go ahead and put it in the chat now, or stay behind and tell me. Totally open to whatever direction our agenda needs to go when we come back together. Okay. See you guys. Have a good break. Get a little screen break, and we'll come back together at 9:50. Oh, yes. Jessica, I'll put it in the.
Hey, Megan, just a heads up, the middle school, I believe they do only have 4 days a week to work with their
Got it. Okay.
acceleration groups. I can't keep up with all the changes.
No, that's helpful.
So that might have changed a little bit with the new updated schedules, but
Okay.
yeah, usually they only have 4 days.
Okay.
Unless one of the middle school people can chime in and correct me.
If they're tier 3, we have them 5 days a week.
Okay.
And as far as at Churchville, at least, we do, I'm planning on doing intervention 5 days a week too.
Okay.
But that's Churchville, and we have bigger numbers. So sometimes we do things the other schools don't typically have tier 3. So it might be a little different for them.
Okay.
I was wondering if we could hit on some comprehension things.
Yeah.
That I don't love decoding and all that stuff.
No. I'll hit on them. And I can even share with you, Suzanne, like I'll make a copy and email you. I'm trying to even think. I've got a file of like some of these that I've planned out with different schools. And honestly, the majority of what I had in my file was more comprehension based, a series of small groups. So I'll make sure I get those to you too. It's hard with this.
Problematic because the elementary tends to work on a lot of decoding, even in the later grades. And then when I get them, their comprehension is so low because they haven't worked on that.
So I'll take comprehension as our next. I'll do. Oops.